For most of human history, the moon was a symbol rather than a destination. It marked time, guided navigation, and shaped myth, but it remained physically unreachable. That changed in the 20th century, when technology transformed the moon from an object of wonder into a place that could be visited. In the 21st century, it is becoming something else entirely, a strategic domain. The idea of lunar colonization no longer belongs solely to science fiction. By the mid-2030s, multiple nations and private entities plan to maintain a sustained presence on the moon. These plans are framed in the language of exploration and science, yet beneath that language lies a quieter reality. The moon is emerging as a site of competition, shaped by geopolitical interests that extend far beyond its barren surface. Unlike Earth, the moon has no indigenous population, no ecosystems in the conventional sense, and no existing borders. This absence makes it appear neutral. Yet history suggests that spaces perceived as empty often become arenas for rivalry. As access increases, so does the incentive to secure advantage before rules fully solidify. At the center of this competition is access to resources. The moon contains materials that are rare or difficult to obtain on Earth. Water ice, believed to exist in permanently shadowed regions near the lunar poles, is particularly valuable. Water supports life, but it can also be split into hydrogen and oxygen, providing rocket fuel. Control over water-rich regions could shape the economics of space activity for decades. Geography matters even on the moon. Certain locations offer strategic benefits, such as continuous sunlight for solar power or proximity to ice deposits. These regions are limited in number. As missions increase, so does the risk that early arrivals will occupy the most favorable sites, not through formal claims, but through presence and infrastructure. International space law was not designed for this scenario. The Outer Space Treaty declares that no nation may claim sovereignty over celestial bodies. However, it does not clearly define how resources may be used or how long-term installations are governed. This ambiguity leaves room for interpretation, and interpretation often reflects power. Some nations frame their lunar ambitions as cooperative. They emphasize shared research stations, open data, and multinational crews. Others pursue more independent strategies, prioritizing national capability and self-sufficiency. These differing approaches reflect broader geopolitical philosophies rather than purely technical considerations. Private companies further complicate the picture. Commercial actors are motivated by profit rather than diplomacy. Their investments in lunar landers, habitats, and resource extraction raise questions about ownership and regulation. If a company builds infrastructure on the moon, who sets the rules for its use? Who enforces them? By 2035, the distinction between national and commercial presence may blur. Governments rely on private companies for launch services and technology. Companies rely on government contracts and legal backing. This interdependence makes lunar activity a hybrid of state power and market forces. The concept of a land grab on the moon is rarely explicit. No flags are planted to claim territory in a legal sense. Instead, claims are implied through activity. A base, a mining operation, or a transport hub creates a zone of influence. Others may be discouraged from operating nearby, not by law, but by practicality. This form of influence is subtle. It does not require confrontation. It relies on momentum. Early movers shape standards, infrastructure, and expectations. Later participants must adapt to systems already in place, even if they had no role in designing them. Security concerns also enter the discussion. The moon has no weapons in the traditional sense, but its position offers advantages. Communication relays, navigation systems, and surveillance platforms could all be placed in lunar orbit or on the surface. Even defensive systems, if framed as protective, can alter strategic balances. Trust becomes a central issue. Activities presented as scientific may have dual-use potential. Transparency is difficult when distances are vast and verification is limited. As more actors operate on the moon, the challenge is not just preventing conflict, but preventing suspicion from escalating. The geopolitical dynamics of the moon reflect broader trends on Earth. Multipolar competition, technological rivalry, and shifting alliances all play out beyond the planet. Space does not erase these dynamics. It extends them. At the same time, the moon offers an opportunity to do things differently. Because permanent settlement is still in its early stages, norms and agreements are still forming. Cooperation is easier to establish before competition hardens into confrontation. Some proposals envision shared lunar zones governed by international agreements. Others advocate for clear resource rights to encourage investment. Each approach carries trade-offs between equity, efficiency, and stability. The timeline toward 2035 matters. Decisions made in the next decade will shape patterns that persist for generations. Infrastructure, once built, is difficult to relocate. Early choices about placement and governance can lock in advantages and inequalities. Smaller nations face particular challenges. Without independent launch capability, they risk exclusion from lunar activity. Their participation depends on partnerships and access agreements. Whether the moon becomes a shared endeavor or a gated domain will depend on how these relationships are structured. Public perception also plays a role. Lunar activity is often framed as inspirational, a symbol of progress and unity. Yet geopolitics operates quietly beneath that narrative. The contrast between public messaging and strategic intent can shape trust or skepticism. Environmental considerations add another layer. The moon's surface is fragile in its own way. Disturbance of ancient regolith, shadowed craters, and historic landing sites raises ethical questions. Who decides what should be preserved? And who has authority to enforce preservation? By 2035, the moon may host research stations, resource processing units, and transport nodes. None of these require formal ownership to exert influence. Presence itself becomes power. The risk is not immediate conflict, but gradual fragmentation. Separate systems, incompatible standards, and exclusive zones could divide the lunar environment into spheres of influence. Once established, these divisions are difficult to reverse. The alternative is deliberate coordination. Shared infrastructure, transparent operations, and inclusive governance could make the moon a model for managing expansion beyond Earth. This outcome requires restraint as much as ambition. Lunar geopolitics is ultimately about the future of human behavior in space. It tests whether humanity can expand without repeating patterns of competition that dominated earlier eras of exploration. The moon does not belong to any nation, yet it will be shaped by national choices. It is close enough to matter strategically, yet distant enough to invite reflection. By 2035, the question may no longer be whether humans will live and work on the moon, but under what rules. Those rules will not emerge automatically. They will be negotiated, contested, and interpreted. Lunar land grabs do not look like conquest. They look like construction schedules, launch manifests, and memoranda of understanding. Their impact, however, may be just as lasting. The moon stands at the threshold of becoming a shared extension of human civilization. Whether it becomes a site of cooperation or quiet rivalry depends on decisions being made now, often out of public view. In this sense, the geopolitics of moon colonization is not only about space. It is about governance, foresight, and restraint. The moon reflects humanity back to itself, offering a new stage on which old patterns may repeat or finally evolve. By 2035, the outlines of that future will be visible. The question is not who reaches the moon, but what kind of presence they choose to establish once they arrive.